Alrighty, boys and girls, and everyone else who's joining us today. This is Meds Mnemonics. I got a new video that's coming up nice and hot. This one actually is going to be a little complicated and it's going to be a little bit long, so I do apologize in advance for that. If you do like my videos, click the like button, and if you want more of these, just so I know as a litmus test, as I said before in my other videos, try to subscribe to my channel so I know to make more. Okay, so without further ado, let's get this rolling. You can read. Again, I've said this before. If you need medical attention, seek an actual medical professional, and please do not sue my ass. And of course, I do swear. For that, I'm not sorry, and like I always say, tough shit. Okay, so today's topic is going to be the menstrual cycle. This literally is a topic that causes students PMS. So this was actually one of the first topics I actually wanted to tackle, but it was actually pretty complex, and I was trying to figure out exactly how I wanted to essentially piece this together and present it to you. So it's not going to be strictly just memory hooks, but I actually am, for once, going to actually try to explain a little bit of physio and how the actual menstrual cycle actually works. I felt that this was actually poorly explained while I was in medical school, and I really haven't seen any good YouTube videos that actually, tackles this topic extremely well. So I'm going to do my best. A few things are altered, and I left a few things out just for simplicity's sake. So please don't get pissed at me if you're like, hey, like you're missing a piece here, you're missing a piece there. It's because I'm just simply trying to make it as simple as possible. And again, there are some nuances that of when things start and when things don't start. So there is going to be a little bit of debate of like what is correct, and I'm just trying to make this as general as possible. So please don't shoot me in the face if you disagree with some of the things I say in this video. I'm literally just trying to help you, just give you the main basic foundation of how the menstrual cycle actually works. So that being said, let's get going. Okay, so this is going to be the overview. So I'm going to teach you the basics, the HPO axis, a rule that I actually made up. I thought I'd share it with you guys that actually doesn't really apply to the menstrual cycle, but it can apply to other type of axes. Then I'm actually going to dive into the menstrual cycle, talk a little bit about birth control, and then cervical mucus, which is kind of gross. Okay, so the basics. So the cycle length on average is about 28 days, okay? So the way to remember this, very simple, is Valentine's Day is in February. It's 28 days. Aww. Okay, so next is going to be the main parts. There are 4 parts to the menstrual cycle. So there's follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, and then menstruation. You can remember this from the mnemonic FOLM. I was going to say phloem, but it's FOLM, which is in the correct order. So we're going to have follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, and menstruation. And throughout this video, I'm going to break down every single one, talk about the hormones, which parts are up, which parts are down, essentially really get into the nitty-gritty details so you guys actually understand what the hell is going on when you're trying to essentially hammer down the menstrual cycle. So here are going to be the players. You're going to have the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, GnRH, steroids, which is going to be estrogen and progesterone, FSH, and LH. So I just remember this from HAGS. You probably heard this in high school, like "Have a great summer." For some reason, that stuck with me, and I threw this one into the actual mnemonic. And then you're going to have FML. So first is going to be hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, GnRH, which is going to have tropin release hormone, steroids, which are going to be estrogen and progesterone, and then FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and then LH, which is luteinizing hormone. So those are going to be the main players. So first off, we're going to talk about the HPO axis, okay? So as we just did the mnemonic, which is going to be HAGS FML, you're going to have the hypothalamus. This is located like in the center point of your cranium or your brain. What it's going to do is it's going to release GnRH. And what this is going to do is going to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release FSH and LH. These are going to travel down to the ovaries, and what they're going to end up doing is they're going to end up stimulating the ovary to spit out steroids, which is going to be estrogen and progesterone. And when it does this, it's going to have what's called negative feedback. So when the steroids are actually made, it can go back and tell them, hey, hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, you guys can stop making this shit. We've got enough down here. Stop sending us orders to make more steroids. So that's essentially how this works. Okay, so now onto the rule. There's going to be the high to low and then the low to high. This will make a little bit more sense when I go through it. I hope I don't lose you in this process, but hopefully it does kind of clarify how to look at an HPO axis, because this part really does screw people up as to what parts are high, what parts are low, and how the hell this actually works. So Try to bear with me. Please don't fall asleep. I'm going to do the best that I can. Okay, so the rule, it starts with high to low, and then we're going to have low to high regarding the HPO axis. So for the first word, that part is going to be high. And we're going to start with FSH and LH. The second word is going to be for steroids, which is estrogen and progesterone. So if you have a little bit of foresight, the first words are going to be high, so FSH and LH, and then the second word, which are the steroids, are going to be low. So this rule is regarding what is up is high regarding FSH and LH. So starting with high, these are going to be the two, like I said before. So FSH and LH are smaller words, so these are going to be first. So essentially what I'm saying is, when you say high to low in the beginning of this, FSH and LH are the first part, meaning that they're going to be high, and that the steroids are the second word, which are going to be low. Okay, so here's going to be in a little bit more explanation. So first word that's going to be high, that's going to be FSH and LH. Second word, which are going to be low, is going to be estrogen and progesterone. So what the fuck does this actually mean? So what's going to happen is one or the other has to be high. You cannot have the FSH and LH high and then the steroids high as well. It's got to be one or the other. You have one that's going to be high, the other one's going to be low. So what's happening is initially FSH and LH are actually going to be high. Their job is to go down the ovaries and tell them to actually start making steroids. So those are going to initially be low, but over time are going to creep up. So if the ovaries are not able to make steroids, if they're low, you're not going to have any negative feedback to go tell them stop giving us orders, like I said before. An example of this would be Turner syndrome. So if the ovaries are broken, they cannot make steroids. Therefore, there's no negative feedback. Therefore, FSH and LH remain high. And I'm going to show you on a graphic that's going to be here on the right to kind of explain what I just said. So if you look over here, the FSH and LH, which is coming from the anterior pituitary, are going to be high. Their job is to go send signals to the ovaries to actually start increasing steroids. But at this snap point in time, you can see that only one can be high and the other can be low. So starting in the menstrual cycle, FSH and LH start high and the steroids start low, okay? And then over time, as FSH and LH tell the ovaries to make steroids, those are actually going to increase, and these two are actually going to switch. So the steroids will be high, and then FSH and LH will be low. This will make more sense in more graphics, but I just want you to get the sense of what a high to low part of the rule is. Okay, so now what I just said, when they switch, this is going to be low to high. So remember, the first word is low, and that's pertaining to FSH and LH. Okay, so these are going to be low later in the menstrual cycle. Second word, which is going to be high, is going to be regarding to the steroids, which is estrogen and progesterone. So again, what the fuck does this mean? So when the steroids are high, they will have negative feedback telling FSH and LH and the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, hey, we have enough steroids, stop sending us messages, cut that shit out. We don't need that signal anymore. So what it can do is steroids can actually loop back around and actually tell the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, hey, stop releasing FSH and LH, we're good, we have enough steroids. So you can see that here, that FSH and LH are going to be turned off. So keep this in mind. FSH and LH's job is to stimulate steroid production. So if they're present, they're going to go back and turn them off. So that's exactly what I just said before, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make it nice and clear what this part of this rule means. That the first word is low, that's pertaining to FSH and LH, those are going to be low. The second word is high, and that's regarding to steroids. And the reason that the steroids can be high is they can actually go around and loop back and tell the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to cut that shit out and stop releasing FSH and LH. We're good and we have enough steroids. That's like the final product that we're trying to make. Again, I'll have another graphic here on the right. So again, steroids are high. You can see the arrows loop back around. They have negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. This is going to shut off FSH and LH because you don't need the order anymore. The final product has been made, which are steroids. And this is what's going to happen throughout the menstrual cycle, okay? So overall, like I said, I know I'm beating this to death. This rule tells you, based off FSH and LH numbers, which set is going to be high or low when given a patient's labs and exam. So this should make it fairly simple and straightforward, that if one is high, you have to intuitively think the other can be low. So just remember high to low to high. If you remember that order, and you remember that FSH and LH pertain to the first word, and the steroids pertain to the second word, then you'll be able to figure out where you are in the menstrual cycle, or you can figure out which one's going to be high and which one's going to be low. Essentially, it's just a rule of they cannot be both high, they cannot be both low. One has to be one or the other, and they're inverse of each other. So that's all I'm trying to tell you. In the beginning, FSH and LH are going to be high, steroids are going to be low, and then throughout the menstrual cycle, that is going to switch. It'll go from a low to high, meaning that FSH and LH are going to be low and the steroids are going to be high. I'm sorry I'm beating this to death, but I just really want to get that straight because this will make your life a lot easier if you're trying to answer test questions and your mind is just burnt to a crisp and you're like, wait, which one's high, which one's low, which one's negative feedback? Like, this actually will kind of help cut through that shit and keep it nice and straight and simple. So I hope you actually like that rule from high to low to high. So I'm hoping that helps, and it essentially explains and you can absorb the menstrual cycle a little bit easier as we go through this video. Okay, so as for the main topic, we're going to go through the menstrual cycle. Okay, so I created this graph. Again, like I said in the beginning of this video, this isn't exactly how the graph is supposed to look. As an example, estrogen is supposed to increase and then dip a little bit as it's supposed to get through the rest of the graph. I cut that part out because it gets a little confusing, and this is actually just easier on the eyes. As you can see, I'll use my cursor over here. Right over here, you have FSH and LH. This is the high to low part I was talking about with that rule. These start high, and you can see that estrogen and progesterone are going to be low. And then over time, you're going to see that it's going to be low to high, meaning that these steroids are going to be high, and then FSH and LH are going to be low. So that was essentially the only thing that I was trying to get across of the high to low and low to high rule. So this is the graph that I made. I'm going to be using it throughout the PowerPoint. I hope this is actually easy to follow, because when you look at ones like in first aid or any kind of biological textbook, they have them all kind of spread out and separated, and they just have lines going all over the place, and it's super fucking confusing. So I wanted something that was nice and neat and just easy on the eyes. You can look at it and follow it relatively quickly, and it doesn't require a ton of mental power. So that's why I created this graph, which is not easy, and you're welcome. So I'll be using this in bits and pieces throughout this video. So let's get going on the menstrual cycle. So we're going to start here. So real quick, as I said with the FOLM mnemonic, there's going to be the parts that are going to be inserted here in the menstrual cycle. So the first is going to be menstruation, then it's going to be the follicular phase, then you're going to have ovulation, and then you're going to have luteal phase. Again, these are the four main parts. And just to preface, some people have argued that menstruation is either at the beginning or at the end. I couldn't really pick which one to pick, and I'm not a physiologist, I'm not an endocrinologist, so I put menstruation in the beginning just to make it a little bit more simplistic, that it follows from there. But please don't shit on me for putting it in the beginning or argue that it's supposed to be at the end. I just put it one part or the other. Essentially, regardless where you put it, either the beginning or the end, it's still going to fall into the follicular to ovulation to luteal phase into menstruation. So please just don't give me some flack for that. I understand that certain textbooks are going to say different things, and that's what makes this topic so freaking confusing, is that there's too many different viewpoints in how this shit works. So I'm just trying to make this as simple as possible. Okay, so real quick, I made a really crappy graph on the side here, but this essentially just what happens with the players and how they kind of all interconnect. So over here, I'm just going to use my cursor real quick. This is supposed to be like the female pelvis. This is just it kind of cut in half. And this is going to be the right side of the body facing you. So we're looking at our left, their right. You're going to have the ovary right here, the fallopian tube, and then the main part of the uterus where the endometrium is going to be right here, where implantation of an ovum, which is going to be a fertilized egg plus a sperm, is going to implant into the endometrium right here. This is cervix, essentially just the opening to the uterus, and then the vagina, and then outside the body. All right, I'm going to get rid of my cursor. So to the players. So number one is going to be the HPO axis. Like I said, like the hypothalamus is going to go to the anterior pituitary, and it's going to send FSH, LH down to the ovary. So here's the ovary, which is number two. It's going to contain follicles. And a follicle essentially is just like, oh, let me click. A follicle is going to be a fluid hacky sac that secretes hormones and actually holds the egg. It's going to be actually in the cortex, or the outer part of the ovary, and it's going to have thousands of millions of these things. So essentially what's going to happen is every month a follicle is actually going to increase in size, and then it's actually going to burst. And it's containing endocrine cells, which can actually receive signals to make the steroids and also to grow in size and get ready for release of the egg, which is going to be ovulation. And then the endometrium, as I already pointed out, that's going to be the lining of the uterus where implantation, pregnancy occurs. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the two main phases of the menstrual cycle. So you're going to have the follicular phase, which comes first, and then the second big part is going to be the luteal phase. And the way that you remember which one comes first is that follicular phase is the first of the new cycle, and then luteal is going to be last. So follicular phase is going to be from 5 to 14 days, and then luteal phase is going to be 14 to 28 days. Which parts are going to be high? Well, remember the high to low, low to high rule. So if follicular phase is the first part, the high to low, FSH is going to be high. And then if you do the low to high, then the steroids are going to be high. So what you actually want to produce during each phase is follicular phase is going to be estrogen, and then luteal phase is going to be progesterone. It's got to be either one or the other. It's not going to make both, concurrently. And then the follicular phase is going to be the proliferative phase, meaning that with the endometrium, which is going to be the lining of the uterus, in the follicular phase, it's actually going to build it up. The whole point is essentially start from scratch, because when you have menstruation, you're shedding that uterine lining. You're essentially going back to zero, and you need to build that up over from 5 to 14 days. So the follicular phase is to essentially make a new uterine lining, which is the endometrium. And then the luteal phase is the secretory phase, meaning that once it's built, you need to keep it and support it to keep it there just in case pregnancy does occur. And if it doesn't, then menstruation is going to happen. You're going to slough that off, and then it's going to bleed out and come out of the body, and then you're going to start the process all over again. So now you're looking at me being like, well, how the hell am I supposed to remember all this? Well, it's actually fairly simple. You can use something that you've been using since, 2, 3 years old. Remember the alphabet. So follicular phase comes first, so F becomes 4L, which is going to be high. F and L are going to come before S in the alphabet. Estrogen becomes before progesterone in the alphabet. Proliferative phase becomes before the secretory phase. So when in doubt, if you're taking an exam in reproduction or what have you, and you need something like this, just remember, first, last, FSH, LH, steroids, estrogen, progesterone, proliferative, secretory. If you just read them in alphabetical order, you'll be able to figure out which one comes first. And you can draw the menstrual cycle in the graph, like the one I created, knowing that follicular is on the left and luteal is on the right. And then estrogen's on the left, progesterone's on the right, and so on and so forth. I think this is a very powerful slide, and this is going to answer a lot of questions and kind of keep and segregate any kind of confusion as to which parts are high, what's the whole point of this phase, which one does what, and this actually is nice and neat, and I actually really do like this slide. If you're going to screenshot anything throughout this video besides the graph, definitely screenshot this one. This is a very important slide. So if I were you, I'd stare at this one for a good minute just to make sure you have it. Hit pause, and then once you have it, let's move forward. Okay, we're moving forward. Okay, so we're going to talk about the follicular phase, which is going to be the first main part of the menstrual cycle. So as you can see, I took the graph on the right and I cut it in half. We're talking about the first part. So it's going to be days from 5 to 14 days. So I'm essentially just going to give you a nice overview of what the follicular phase is all about. So the main point is to produce estrogen. And estrogen's job is going to want to induce or increase the odds of ovulation, and then it wants to produce a new endometrium because you sloughed off and got rid of the one from the last period because you didn't use it and didn't get pregnant. So therefore, we have to build up another one in case we do want to get pregnant during this cycle. So the whole point is you need to use estrogen, which is going to induce ovulation, meaning you're going to spit out the egg from the follicle, from the ovary, and you want to start building up the endometrium, hence why it's called proliferative. Like you're actually producing something. You're producing a new uterine lining, which is going to increase the endometrium. So remember, like I said, high to low rule. FSH and LH are going to be high and the steroids are going to be low. So I'm going to use my cursor again. Here's FSH and LH. It starts high and the hormones are going to be low. They're going to be down here. You can see that estrogen starts nice and low, and progesterone, I didn't even draw it in here because it gets so damn confusing. It's so kind of clustered, but those are going to be low. I've already said this before, FSH and LH are going to be released from the anterior pituitary. They're going to go to the ovaries to interact with the follicular cells and tell it to start producing estrogen. And oh yeah, this question does come up a lot on tests. They'll ask like versus the follicular phase versus the luteal phase, like which one can actually fluctuate or shorten or lengthen, because you'll have females coming in saying like, hey, like my periods, are changing in time and they're not always like on the dot. Well, what they're going to ask is like which part of the phase actually is changing, and that is actually the follicular phase, which is the one that quote unquote fluctuates. So luteal phase is always going to be like 14 days. That part does not change. So luteal phase stays constant, where the follicular phase actually fluctuates. So I just kind of threw that in there because I've been asked it before and it pissed me off that I didn't know it. So this is a good way to remember that. Follicular phase does fluctuate. So this is a nice overview of the follicular, that's a tricky word to say, follicular phase. That is the first of the cycle. It's 5 to 14 days. The FSH and LH are going to be high, and it's going to be producing estrogen, and the whole point is to be proliferative. You want to induce ovulation, and you want to build up a new endometrium for implantation for pregnancy later in the cycle. Okay, so the question is, how does a follicle actually make estrogen? That is the whole point. You want to make the steroid. So it's going to be done through two types of cells that's actually within the follicle, okay? So they are called theca cells and granulosa cells. So what's going to happen is LH is going to target the theca cells to actually make a type of steroid. So it's going to take cholesterol. There's a few steps in between. I actually cut that out because I really didn't want to bog you guys down with too many hormones and too many pathways. Essentially, the initial product is cholesterol, and then the second final product is going to be androstenedione. I can't really say that, I'm butchering it. And the enzyme that's actually going to be producing this is called 17 alpha hydroxylase. And then what's going to happen is once this final product is actually what it's going to do is actually going to float over and exit the theca cell and go into the granulosa cell. And that's going to start as the product right here. And as you can see, that FSH is going to be stimulating the granulosa cell to take the androstenedione. I can't spell. I'm surprised I made it through med school. You know what I'm trying to say. And then the enzyme for here is going to be aromatase, which is actually going to make the final product as 17 beta estradiol. And this is actually going to be the estrogen that's actually going to be pumping up the endometrium and increasing the lining of the uterus, and it's eventually going to induce ovulation. That's exactly what I just said. Increase ovulation and endometrium. So you're probably looking at this and saying, how the hell am I supposed to remember all this? Well, I got some neat little tricks coming up right now. Okay, so if you take the word theca cell, we're going to start over here on the left at the bottom. If you take the second two letters, C is going to be for cholesterol, and then the A is going to be for the andro. So that's actually, what the initial and final product are. And if you take the T and if you flip it around here and cut that little part off, it actually looks like an L. So it's going to be LH. And also it's going to produce the 7 here, which is going to be 17 alpha hydroxylase. So if you can just remember this and kind of separate this word out, you can see what it's actually going to produce and what kind of enzyme it's used, and if it responds to either LH or FSH. And in this case, it's LH. So we're going to come over here, and I had a theme called the S's. So if you look at FSH, if you look at granulosa, it has the S in here, aromatase, and then estradiol. And it really does help that like theca cells does not have an S, and it's actually made it very nice and neat to separate these two. So on the left, theca, it's going to be cholesterol to the andro word that I can't spell. And then you're going to have stimulation from LH, and it's going to be 17 alpha hydroxylase. And over the right, just use the S's. So it's going to be FSH, granulosa, and then aromatase, and then estradiol, which is the main product of estrogen, which is going to be produced during the follicular phase. So I thought this was a nice, neat little trick to kind of memorize this. And I know it's very in-depth, but I thought these were good mnemonics, and it did help keep these straight when I was being tested on these during the exams. Okay, so far we've talked about the follicular phase. We're at that point where FSH and LH are high, but essentially, like I said, the whole point is they're telling the ovaries to make steroids. So essentially what's going to happen is eventually that steroids start low. Like I said, they are going to change at some point. So estrogen is going to start going up. So that's exactly what's going to be happening here. So now we're going to talk about the next parts. Okay, so this is where the switch happens. This is actually what drives any kind of healthcare professional student, whether you be a PA, MP, if you're an undergrad, if you're trying to memorize the menstrual cycle, this is the part that becomes so fucking confusing. Because, like I said, steroids typically have a negative feedback. You're telling the order to stop coming. You've made the steroid. Stop telling us to make more. This is called the switch. And I'll show it through graphics on the right over here. So I'm just going to kind of click through this and just read it to you so it actually makes sense and I can stop saying blabbling shit that doesn't make any sense. So initially, FSH and LH are high, and they're going to tell the ovaries to start producing estrogen. You can see that. Estrogen is going to increase over time and have negative feedback on FSH and LH. So you can see that here in the graph. So with my cursor, you can see you have the steroids. What it's going to do is have negative feedback on the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. It's going to shut these off. Therefore, this is going to start going down. It's telling it to stop making these, stop sending the order. And then this switch happens. So essentially what happens is estrogen, meaning this guy right here, will actually come around. Instead of being negative feedback, it's actually going to promote this and actually tell it to make one of these even more. So it's going to go from a negative feedback to a positive feedback. So you can see in this part of the graph, FSH and LH are starting to go down as estrogen is going up, but this actually needs to switch. So now here's the switch. Estrogen has a positive feedback will have two effects. It's actually going to increase only luteinizing hormone. It's actually going to decrease FSH. We don't need that shit anymore. Just get rid of that one. And with the help with another molecule called inhibin, it actually shuts down FSH as well. And I'll show that in the graph on the right in a second. So now it becomes a high to high switch situation. So with my cursor, steroid is actually going to start having a positive feedback on these two here. What it's going to do is it's going to start increasing LH here. But it's going to get rid of FSH through estrogen and inhibin. It's only have a positive feedback on GnRH and LH, but FSH is going to stay low. But I know this sounds confusing. It's called the switch. It happens during follicular phase, but at some point, and there's a lot of physiology that goes behind it, and I didn't want to bore you to death with it. I'm leaving that part out. I'm just calling it the switch. I'm not going to talk about receptors, one being upregulated, one being downregulated. It's too much, and I don't have any words for it. So I'm just not going to even go into defending myself on that. So the whole point is, at some point, estrogen goes from negative feedback and just for some reason switches to a positive feedback, and it only increases LH, but actually inhibits FSH. So that's the whole point. That's the take-home message. So again, this is what we just went through is going to be through a graphical term here. So initially, FSH and LH were high. It's going to start increasing estrogen. Estrogen starts going up, it's going to have negative feedback on FSH and LH, and as you can see, it starts going down. Then you're going to have the switch, where estrogen is going to keep going up, and LH is going to go up, but you can see that FSH, which is the dotted line here, is just going to stay down. But the actual LH and the actual estrogen, these both are actually going to keep going up, okay? So essentially, we're almost to halfway through the menstrual cycle. I hope I haven't fried your brains by now, but I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. I'm going to say this one more time. The high to low rule, FSH and LH are going to be high. Its whole point is to start making estrogen because estrogen is low. That's the low part of the rule of high to low rule. At a certain point, estrogen is going to go up and it's going to have negative feedback on FSH and LH, hence why it goes down. At some point, you're going to have a switch. Instead of it being negative feedback, it's going to be positive feedback. And it's only going to be on luteinizing hormone, on the LH, not on FSH. Is why you can see FSH is flatlined the whole time. It's only going to be high at the beginning, and then it just stays low for the rest of the menstrual cycle because it's no longer necessary. All right, so that's the recap. Let's keep moving. And this is the next part that we're going to talk about. This is called the LH surge. This is ovulation. So ovulation is the part that I just pointed out, which is called the LH surge. And you can see over here in the green, which we're going to have, this is LH. This part is just going to surge like crazy because of that positive feedback from estrogen. It's just saying make more and more and more. And the LH is what induces the follicle to actually release the egg. That's what ovulation is. So it occurs on day 14 and lasts 1 to 3 days. Like I said before, the LH is going to increase and estrogen is going to increase through positive feedback. It's going to increase it so much that it's called the LH surge, where the oocyte is actually released from the follicle. The oocyte can now travel to the fallopian tube for fertilization. And the follicle, once it releases the actual oocyte, it actually becomes, and termed, the corpus luteum, means yellow body. Okay, so in case you didn't quite understand that, I actually made a nice little cartoon that actually will help you memorize that the LH surge and the release of the actual egg from the follicle is actually due to LH and not anything else. So you have LH, it's going to come down, it's going to stimulate the follicle and the egg. Egg is a little pink thing in the middle. Now, this is so funny. The L actually looks like a leg, and just imagine the follicle is a soccer ball. So just imagine that this leg is going to come and kick it, okay? And if you burst it, it's going to release the egg and it's going to go into the fallopian tube for potential fertilization. This is ovulation, which is the release of the egg. And once it does that, the follicle will now become the corpus luteum, and it means yellow body, hence why I colored it yellow. So I hope this is a nice mnemonic. So when they ask the question, like, which hormone causes ovulation, it's LH, because the L actually looks like a leg kicking a ball. I thought this was great. It's very easy to remember. Just look at your leg. It looks like an L. Boom. LH is the one that actually causes ovulation and release of the egg from the follicle, and that is ovulation. Okay? Okay. So here's the overview again. Now we're going to talk about the second half. We predominantly talked about the follicular phase, a little bit of ovulation, which is short, and then the egg is now been released, and now we're going to talk about what happens in the luteal phase. Okay, like I said before, it is the last of the new cycle. It is 14 to 28 days, as you can see here, 14 to 28. This will be the last day. As you can see, the steroids are going to be high. This is the low to high. Remember, the steroids pertain to the second word of the rule. So these are going to be high. FSH and LH are going to be low, okay? And the whole point of the luteal phase is to make progesterone. That's why it's nice and high up here. And the whole point is called the secretory phase, meaning you want to sustain the endometrium that was built in the follicular phase. Once you built it, it's kind of like a deck of cards. Now you just need to kind of protect it and make sure that no windows open and blow it down. The whole point is just to keep it alive, just in case fertilization does occur, and you can keep it. If it doesn't happen and you don't have sex, or there is no implantation of a zygote or a fertilized egg, then you need to get rid of it, and then you just slough it off, and then you have menstruation. That is the whole point. So again, I have this in words below. The main point: produce progesterone. This is going to support the endometrium and increase the corpus luteum. Like I said, the low to high rule. Low pertains to FSH and LH, so those are going to be low. What's going to be high are the steroids, but more in particular, the progesterone. The corpus luteum is actually really important that you keep this around. What it's going to do is secrete progesterone and a little bit of estrogen, and it's going to be from the theca and granulosa cells. Secretory phase, like I said, is preparing the endometrium for implantation, thinking that if the egg does get fertilized, it needs to implant somewhere, and you need the endometrium you need to stay around for it to actually support and actually create implantation and therefore start pregnancy. Okay, so now we're getting towards the end. So if no fertilization actually occurs, this is going to be at the endometrium on the 28th day. If no implantation occurs, meaning no zygote, there's going to be no more progesterone, because at a certain point, the corpus luteum doesn't have enough support. It's kind of like a ticking time bomb. Like, it can only stick around during those 14 days. After this, it needs something to tell it to keep going, and I'll explain that in a second. But if there's no fertilization, it has no instructions to make more progesterone. So if there's no more progesterone, the corpus luteum cannot spit out steroids. Therefore, it will decompose in the corpus albicans, leftover scar tissue in the ovary. All right, I'm going to explain this another way. I'm going to use this in hormone lingo, okay? No implantation means no sex. It's kind of a bummer, which means no beta HCG. And I'll talk about where that comes from a little bit later. That means the beta HCG cannot tell the corpus luteum to stick around. If that doesn't stick around, it cannot make progesterone. Therefore, the endometrium is going to die and it's going to be shedding off. And this is what menstruation actually is. And over here, it means no sex, means everything dies. It means that progesterone goes down, estrogen goes down, the endometrium starts to shed and slough off, and that's actually what menstruation is. And the corpus luteum actually is going to die and stop producing any progesterone to further support the endometrium lining. So the whole point is, if this is just a domino effect, if you don't have the fertilized egg, it's not going to produce beta HCG, which is not going to tell the corpus luteum to make progesterone to support the endometrium. Therefore, everything just goes back down, and this is where menstruation is actually going to occur. Removal of the no longer needed endometrium. Okay, like I said, it could be at the beginning, it could be at the end, but I put at the beginning. Please don't slap me for that. Okay, so that's what menstruation is. What I was explaining before, that if you have that, sequential order of no fertilized egg, you're not going to have beta HCG. It's not going to tell the corpus luteum to make progesterone. Therefore, the endometrium is not going to be supported. Therefore, it's going to slough off in 5 days. And then that is menstruation. So on the flip side, let's say you do have sex and fertilization does occur. So you have implantation. It means you had sex. Congratulations. And then this is where beta HCG is going to be produced. You're probably wondering where the hell did this come from in the past slide, but this is actually where it comes from. And if you see the little asterisk over here, the implanted zygote, meaning the fertilized egg, once it gets to the endometrium, is going to make a placenta. And they have these specific cells called this one's even a more tough one, syncytiotrophoblasts cells, which actually spit out the hormone beta HCG. So if you have a fertilized egg, it's going to make beta HCG. It's going to tell the corpus luteum to keep sticking around. And if that can happen, it's going to still continue to make progesterone. So it'll stay high during pregnancy. And you can see over here that this is what's going to happen in the graph, that if you do have fertilization and implantation, it's going to make beta HCG and it's going to tell the corpus luteum to continue to make steroids. If this happens, then the endometrium is going to be sustained and being supported. Therefore, it's not going to slough off and you will not have a menstruation. It won't slough off because you're actually using it for a pregnancy. So again, endometrium and corpus luteum continue to support pregnancy. Okay, so this is actually a whole slide to kind of just answer any questions of anything you're like, wait, where did this thing come from? Where did that come from? And just little tidbits of information. So fertilization, it typically occurs 1 day after ovulation on day 14. Location of fertilization, meaning when the actual oocyte or the egg meets the sperm, is actually in the ampulla of the fallopian tube. I've been asked that quite a few times. That's actually a very popular question. The zygote implants into the endometrium in 6 days, meaning that after it gets fertilized, it goes through the actual fallopian tube into the uterus, and then it implants itself into the endometrium. It usually takes about 6 days for that to happen. And the way you remember this is that it sticks on 6. So the syncytiotrophoblasts will secrete beta HCG, which is going to maintain the corpus luteum to keep spitting out progesterone. Therefore, the progesterone is going to support the endometrium and it won't slough off. Therefore, you won't have menstruation. And the corpus luteum, for the first 8 to 10 weeks, is actually going to be the one producing the progesterone for the first 8 to 10 weeks of pregnancy. And then at a certain point, it's actually going to switch over to the placenta making the steroids, such as progesterone, to support the endometrium in the whole process of pregnancy for the next 9 months. So the main point is progesterone supports endometrium and implantation, therefore leading to pregnancy. Okay, real quick, how birth control works. I'm not going to talk about the individual kinds and which ones they are. I just want to give you a brief overview as to how this works. So you've heard of the term OCPs, which are oral contraceptive pills. OCPs are hormones. They're progesterone and estrogen. You can get certain birth controls where they're They could just be progesterone. They could be a mix of these. I just wanted you to be aware they're not always, progesterone and estrogen. There are variations that have one and not the other. So the way that this works is that the hormones trick the body into thinking that it's pregnant because, like I said in the past few slides, if you have progesterone around, that's going to support the endometrium and tell it to just that we are pregnant, and it's going to shut off FSH and LH. So the whole point is to have that negative feedback, which is the low to high rule, that if you have steroids, which are progesterone and estrogen, which should be produced from the placenta, meaning that you are pregnant, it's going to tell FSH and LH to chill out and stay low because we don't want to get ready for another menstrual cycle. We are pregnant. We don't need to do this for the next 9 months. So therefore, you need to shut that off, and that's what birth control is. It's a trick. You're tricking your body into thinking you are pregnant from the presence of progesterone and estrogen. So what it's going to have, like I said, negative feedback on FSH and LH, preventing menstruation and stopping the menstrual cycle, meaning you have no period. Alternates besides the hormones are going to be IUDs, which is intrauterine devices. Is either going to be copper or progesterone, which work locally to prevent fertilization. And I didn't put it in the slide, but they'll ask you a question like, what is the best emergency contraceptive within a certain given time? I think it's like 72 hours. Let's say you just had sex and you're like, oh no, I don't want to get pregnant and I would like to prevent this from happening. They would actually say like, what is the best contraception to use? And it actually would be the copper IUD. But you do need to take a pregnancy beforehand to make sure that they don't implant it while you're actually being pregnant, because those are going to contradict each other, and that's not going to end out well if you have a copper IUD in there when you're actually pregnant. So just keep that in mind, that if they do ask which one's the best, almost like quote unquote plan B to not get pregnant, it's going to be the copper IUD. And also with pregnancy tests, they can detect beta HCG. That's actually what they're looking for. If you do it in blood and you get pregnant, it takes about a week for it to show up in blood, and then in urine, it takes about 2 weeks. So I just wanted you guys to know the timeline on that. Okay, cervical mucus. I got a question on these, and it's kind of annoying, so I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a heads up as to which one does what. So progesterone, it's going to prevent access. So when you think about it, it's going to be in the luteal phase. It's in the part where it's supporting the endometrium. It's assuming that the sperm is already on its way. When you open the doors, you just want a couple to come in, and then once the sperm is actually making its way to the fallopian tube to actually implant and fertilize the actual egg, you don't want other ones coming behind it. You don't want to have someone having like octuplets or some shit like that. So progesterone's job is to prevent access. And just think about, it's a longer word than estrogen, so think that it's thicker. It makes a thick mucus, and it's going to stop the sperm from entering the actual uterus. And pee, and just think pus. So as for estrogen, it does the complete opposite. It wants you to enter, aka easy access. It's going to be thin mucus, think that it's a smaller word, and allows the sperm to enter in the uterus. This makes sense because it's the first part. It's part of the follicular phase when it's making the endometrium. If a sperm happens to get its way in there right at the time of ovulation on day 14, perfect, because that's exactly how fertilization and pregnancy actually starts. And that's how procreation happens. And jokingly, I put in there and come on in. So that's the difference between progesterone and estrogen when it comes to cervical mucus. Okay, so here's a quick bonus slide. I promise we're almost done. I know this is a really long video and I've thrown a lot at you, and I'm sorry if I melted your brains, but this is the best I could do with the menstrual cycle with the tools that I have. So what gets really confusing is actually like the physiologic relationship between dopamine, prolactin, and GRNH. If you just remember this term or this mnemonic, down, up, gone, you can see how these actually interact with each other. So dopamine will decrease, prolactin will increase, and GnRH will actually decrease. So here's an example of what this actually means. If you have prolactin, which is going to be the UP, if this is actually high, it's going to decrease dopamine and it's going to decrease GnRH, hence down and gone. And what this can lead to if prolactin is high, it'll lead to galactorrhea and amenorrhea, meaning milk is being produced, that's what this word means, and then no menstruation, which amenorrhea means. So I just kind of want to throw this in here. I like writing this down during my repo exams because if you just write down, up, gone, if you know that dopamine's really high, you know that prolactin's going to be the opposite. That one's going to be down. They're inverse of each other. And if you have prolactin up, you know that it's going to decrease dopamine and that it's actually going to knock off GnRH. If you shut off GnRH, it can't tell FSH and LH to go stimulate the ovaries to actually make steroids. Therefore, it's like an indirect birth control when you think about it. So it shuts that part off. I just wanted you to remember this. Down, up, gone, dopamine decrease, prolactin increase, GnRH decreased. I hope that makes sense. Alrighty, this is the last slide. I was going to actually make a recap slide, but that turned into being like 5 pages. So I'm sorry I didn't make one for you. I usually make them for every video. In my future ones, there will be, but there was just so much content in this video that it was just damn near impossible to fit on one slide without, wanting to smash your head against a computer. So at least you have the menstrual cycle here. You have this beautiful graph that I made. It's very helpful. If you can just draw this, it's actually going to be very helpful just to understand the whole process. And this is a really tough topic. I mean, I still feel like I didn't do it justice. Like, it's really difficult. There's a lot of opinions on how this works, and there's a lot of physio that goes on. But I hope this video actually was helpful, at least with some of the basics of just learning the order, learning which one and the main point of which one does, and just the basic process. And I really hope this was helpful. I really hope I don't get a lot of shitty comments down below. And I actually do get some likes and not dislikes, because this really is a tough topic. And I did search through a lot of YouTube and see if there were actually good videos on this. And I have yet to find one, hence why I made this, because it is such a difficult topic to tackle. Alrighty, well, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want me to make more videos as a litmus test, as I said before in my past videos, please subscribe to my channel. And if you have any advice or any other better ways to memorize this stuff, or any other memory hooks that are helpful, by all means, drop it in a comment below. And I hope this was helpful. I know that this was a long video and it's tough, and I went through it fairly quickly, and this is the best I could do. I'm sorry if this wasn't the all end all holy grail of explaining the menstrual cycle, but I think this does a little bit better of a job than anyone else has tried. So I took my shot at it. I hope I didn't swing and miss. I'll even take a blunt on this one, and I'll shut the fuck up. All right, love you guys. Yeah, click the like button, subscribe, and if you want me to make more videos, or if you have any comments, just drop them below. And I have a few more coming out that I'm starting to get ready. Alrighty, so that being said, good luck with studying, and I'll see you at the next video. All right, peace.